So we are going to be talking about the new CSRD rules that are coming in January. We've obviously all known about them for quite a while, but we're going to discuss how that's going to impact the hotel and service department landscape. First of all, it's probably going to impact about 50,000 companies across the EU, although if you've got fewer than 750 people, you don't have to report on your Scope 3 until a year later. And talking of Scope 3, this is where we come into it, because you are part of the value chain and all eyes are going to be on those RFP questions about ESG and where your emissions are coming from. So first of all, we thought we'd keep it quite simple because it could be a very long discussion. And we thought we'd break it down into 3 questions. Why, how, I think it was how next, and then what. So I'm going to start first with James from Beyond to kind of just explain a little bit about why it's so important that people get their data ducks lined up.
Yeah. I think everyone's compass is now aligned. Everyone seems to be sort of moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are moving in that direction with words rather than deeds, which I think needs to be addressed. I think, however, a number of people have talked about how the industry has moved on, rapidly over the last few years, and part of that is the gathering of data, which is valuable to give you a reference point of where you are now and where you need to be in the future. The main thing, like you mentioned, is going to be legislation. It's unfortunate that people have had to wait for legislation before they've actually done something about it. People seem to be only acting now when they have to, but that is certainly going to drive, from next year onwards, where the bigger companies are going to have to start to measure and then in 25 start to report on the data from their emissions alongside their financial data. And some people are saying going forwards it will be equally as important, and companies will be rated both on their financial performance and on their sustainability performance.
And presumably, obviously, that also impacts on, investments. If you're not going to be that green, or not, shouldn't say green, yes. If you're not going to be that company, you're not going to get investment.
Yes, totally. I was speaking to Yufi Ibrahim of the EEA, and I asked her, do you think you'll get cheaper debt if you're a green hotel company? And she said, no. I think you won't get debt in the future unless you hit certain targets. So I think that's going to be very important. As well as investors, you want to, again, the compass for investors, it's only going in one direction. It has to go in one direction. And going forward, anyone who has a green asset with a green operator is going to be sitting very pretty when it comes to valuations, because they're all going to be scrambling around going, we have to make a certain part of our portfolio into this type of real estate. And there's very few assets. So anyone who's doing that now is going to reap the benefits going forward.
Sure. And Sarah, why do you think we should get on board with this? Well, everyone should get on board with this.
Yeah, I mean, great point made as far as the sort of commercial reasons. I think as well, our customers, our end sort of enterprise clients really, we talked about earlier, the 27-year-old that's starting to work at EY, that sort of average age range. It's not just our customers' goal from the perspective of, making sure that they have the right requirements and the right sort of suppliers to meet those auditing needs, but also that they are operating in good faith alongside the sort of ethos of the new generation that's coming into the workforce. So in order to sort of employ, retain, and also keep those kind of corporate customers happy, I think it's important for us to sort of put our ducks in a row for the planet.
Yeah, for the ethical side of it too. I mean, that's got to be there. So it's ethical, it's monetary, financial, and all those things. I think, as we all know, we are going to have to do it. We should have a little look about how that's going to happen. When we were discussing this among ourselves a while ago, this section was quite long. And it brought up a lot of issues, because how do people report? Is there any consistency? The alignment? What tools do people need? Who does it in the company? Should it be a role for one person, or can it be just an add-on to someone's job? So, Vanessa, can you maybe delve into that a little bit?
So we're an accreditation, right? A sustainability accreditation for short-term rentals and service departments. And what we do is that we look at the unit itself. We don't look at the building. We don't look at how the property manager or the operator does their job. We look at the actual unit and how to reduce the impact of the unit. So for us, really, it starts on the micro level. You know, what can we do in order, once you have your stats, which you take care of, once you have your stats and you know how much you consume, how do we then go about reducing the CO2 emissions? And so this is where this criteria comes in, and we look at everything from technology tools like leak detection systems within the property, to smart occupancy sensors to turn on, turn off the heating and the aircon, and 40 other criteria to help you within the unit to reduce the consumption. I think that's a good place to start in a way. Sure. Looking at the macro level, okay, how much do I consume, but then how much do I want to reduce it by?
And there are a lot of accreditations and certifications that you can get in the hospitality sector. Do you think going forwards, these have got to be boiled down, and therefore, if you don't have that accreditation, there's going to be an issue on your people won't touch you? Or
I do, because these accreditations that we see today, and also the data that we get, is very much based on averages, and you look at it as a whole, you do your square root between all of your buildings. Really, we want to get to the real data, right? And what makes this property, this unit, so sustainable or friendly, eco-friendly. And I think that's really important to the traveler. They don't want to feel guilty when they travel. They don't really care about your overall stats around your whole corporation. They care about when they stay that this property is in line with how they themselves live.
I was going to say, James, yeah. do you think that there's almost an overcomplication across the sector with so many different bodies and ways of measuring things? Is it more simple than that?
It's not 99%, it's 100%. It's got a bit ridiculous, the amount of different accreditation you can get, and it's very difficult for people or guests or owners or investors to know what the value of one over the other. Or we heard about the Portuguese situation where you have to buy a license. Suddenly you go with one accreditation, and then that maybe is not so valuable, you want to go with another accreditation. I think it's immensely confusing. I think the sad sort of state of affairs is people sort of feel by getting accreditation or measuring their data, they've done something. They've done nothing.
And you think they don't need to do that, they can just measure it, and then how will they show that?
I think a lot of people are hiding behind something that's been made overly complex. Right. People talk about the data. Every single month, every single company here, every single individual will get an electricity bill, gas bill, and so forth, will tell you exactly how many kilowatt hours you're using. That kind of data, I've heard companies talk about, well, we're monitoring the data when we know the data will act on the data. You have all the data. Everyone has all the data. There's different and better ways of viewing that data and amassing that data, but it's frustrating. I mean, us as a company, we're not keen on accreditation, you may be able to guess that. We're more about the doing rather than the talking. We're a sustainable company first that happens to provide accommodation solutions. So we look for the best solution. If another one then comes along, great, we'll do that. People are too comfortable doing what they know rather than looking for new solutions.
But you can see why big companies are going to be looking for those. Until there's one accreditation, big companies are going to be looking for an accreditation to show themselves. And I was sorry.
Yeah, and the guests as well. The guests, this Booking.com study just recently said that 80% of travelers are looking for an accreditation on the property. 80%, because that makes them trust the company. And I really appreciate that. You're doing everything, and you're doing everything on the website, and you're communicating extremely well. But this is part of your communication. Is saying, we went through the process. We are in a program.
What are your thoughts on that, Sarah?
I just feel like maybe somewhere in the middle, literally. So I think there's a place, obviously, for the data, and that's very clear. Our industry basically uses averages, as you've just talked about, and it's not good enough. So the Cornell study that sort of the foundation of accommodation CO2 emissions is founded on, the more data that it gets, the better those averages get, and the more ahead the rest of the industry is. So you can take a simple sort of, there's, the Sustainable Hospitality Association has what they call the HCMI. It's a really simple form that properties can fill out. And of course, you'll get your own data out of it, but you'll also be adding to the industry's sort of ability to then create a standard so that not only the customer but the corporate can compare one property to the next and have a global standard for measuring carbon emissions for hotels.
And it is about that benchmarking and starting somewhere as well. And it brings me on to who within these hotels and service apartments, whose job is that to collect that data and to report it and then communicate it? Because I think regardless of whether you're accredited or not, you have to communicate this data, otherwise you're not going to get anyone staying with you.
Yeah, so I'll kind of go with that, because I have a feeling that James has some thoughts. I think that this really will sit with the people who are operationally sort of in the weeds. They know what, to your point, the kind of usage of power and electricity and water and those kind of things go. And that would be sort of their job, to fill out a simple HCMI and then be able to sort of bring that forward to the industry, and then be able to use that as a foundation and benchmark for maybe putting some certifications on top of. But you have to sort of start somewhere with data and then maybe add on the color of getting various different hospitality certifications. But it sits in operations in my view.
Yeah.
The trouble is, sorry.
You go first.
No, the trouble is that obviously we have other verticals, which is hospitality. Short-term rentals, we can't apply in HCMI because we don't calculate waste. Waste is an issue. How do we calculate waste across the industry? So it's going to be very hard to compare. You're going to have to compare, apples with apples and not apples with pears. So how are we going to show this data to the world and say, well, you're better off staying in this service department as opposed to this short-term rental or this hotel? It's hard. But, with the great minds that we have in the sustainability world at the moment,
it is hard to show all the it's like the waste, the emissions, even part of CSRD is the social side as well. So are they paying their staff well enough? That's all going to be transparent. That is going to be shown. So
there are some companies out there that provide averages on waste, if you don't know, so that you can hopefully apply that, and that also take into consideration sort of the ESG and social aspects of a property. I don't know what type of company those are, but there's definitely some out there.
I think James wants to come in here a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I went to a talk the other day, and there were 4 people up on stage talking about sustainability and their passion for it and so forth. And they were all general counsel for the various hotel companies, big companies. And what tends to happen, you asked about who's often given the responsibility rather than who should have the responsibility. Generally, it's like, okay, you do legal, okay, you can do sustainability now. These people often know nothing, and they have to go away, but they can tick a box and do legislation. In fire regulations, there's something called a responsible person. Most people here who run any buildings will know that. And the person is allocated, and they are in charge of getting the plans and so forth in place if the fire people come along. The same thing should be happening within companies, but the person who's responsible should be the CEO. And if they're not then doing certain things, like with the fire regulations, then they can be fined or they can be taken to court and so forth. These things need to come from the top down, unfortunately. And I'd love to see something like that. We'll never see something like that, but I'd love to see something like that.
Yeah, no, it has to come from the top down, but it has to have buy-in from the bottom as well, doesn't it? I was thinking about, so we've covered who in an organisation might do that. What about how that is then presented? The Silver Door's just launched its calculator, and obviously Alta Vita's also going to do something similar now. But it's all these confusing numbers, as Karen was saying. Is there any way we can just make it more simple, or do you have to have the numbers or when will people understand what that number means as they're searching through?
Well, I think it was touched on by Karen. It needs to sort of be relatable. So the sort of CO2 information that we present to travelers has to be relatable to your everyday life. You have to, no one really understands what a kg of carbon equates to. So I think that's the first bit. And the second bit really is focusing in on that global standard. So I think CSRD will help us because they will start to make a claim on what type of methodology needs to be reported on from an audit perspective. Not all of that clarity is there yet, but I do feel like when it is published, everyone will race towards it.
And will all this be, the questions on the RFPs, will they all be standardized questions, or will we see different companies asking different questions? How do we handle that?
Standardized RFPs would be great. That's definitely something that is hopefully coming. But I think that it's really just, there will be themes. There will be themes in each RFP that will touch on certain areas of sustainability. And I think approaching those themes and understanding where your particular operation is in any one of those categories, whether that is pure carbon or whether that is your social or your corporate responsibility, just understanding how you want to respond to some of those RFP questions and themes. But if we could standardize them, that would be great.
And Vanessa, do you think that once RFPs do have these sustainability questions, do you think that it will be a question of people saying, well, unless you've been audited or, for those, we can't go any further?
Yeah, well, with this new greenwashing law that came about in April, obviously everything that you say and report has to be audited, and it will be so implemented in various countries around the EU, at least in the next 2 years. So this is a great time for certifications, for sure, because you need this external certification, you need this external audit. And it does, it does complicate things because you need to do it at scale. How do we audit, in the service department world, how do we audit all of these service departments? But there's been so many companies that have utilized the word green and sustainable in the wrong way. I think if we want to show that we're doing the right things, we need to adhere to being audited from an external party. Yeah, for sure.
That's great, because you've brought me on to the last question, because we've covered the first two and we haven't got very long left for the what. What should be done next, James?
What should be done next? Well, if people want to measure, where they are and where they need to go, then everyone seems to have mentioned AI here today. We use a company called OmniView. They take source data, so that means they're taking it from the source of the data is, such as from your bill. The AI goes into your accounts and various other pieces of information, draws out that information. So it's not what we're telling them, it's where they're getting it from the source. And then they can amalgamate that to come up with various scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions.
So it shows if there's an anomaly on the
system. It shows an anomaly, gives you a ranking
error.
score against the sort of comp set, gives you an intensity rating for each pound that's spent with you, how much CO2 is being produced. Again, coming back to the simplification of this, if there can be one number and everyone can be compared and say, okay, I can see where I'm sitting, I see where I need to get to, or I can see I'm at the bottom, and then corporates can say, hang on, we don't want to stay with people who are below a certain level and we'll maybe pay more for people above a certain level.
So like almost like a star rating, but on emissions?
Yes,
yeah.
That'd be fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Sarah, what do you think needs to happen across the sector, going forwards for it to work?
Yeah, I think we just need to make a start, and just I think the first start really is figure out where the data sits. I mean, we talked about who's going to be sort of presenting it, but just have a think about where that information sits within your organization. Obviously, I work in a data company, so we can't really move forward with calculating it unless it's somewhere that you can access it. Just make a start, figure it out where it is. And then find a credible source. Hopefully we can get to a standardized source in one number, but a credible source for calculating that data when you find it.
maybe also not just look at the data. You know, we tend to, sustainability is a very wide topic, right? And we have more and more, I feel, this tunnel vision about how many emissions, CO2 calculators, etc. What about, you know, how you run your company, diversity, inclusion? You know, the UN has given us so many guidance as to how to run a good company for the future that's going to stand, you know, in the long term, that's going to be there in the long term. So maybe not just look at, you know, that CO2 calculator, which there are hundreds, but maybe also look at all the other wonderful things that we can do in terms of running a company in a sustainable way.
And the industry is, you know, there are a lot of organisations that can help people. It's not as if everyone's there on their own trying to work this out. You've got the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, you've got tools, you know, free tools on there. You've got the big 5 hotel groups which have just set up the, I have to say the acronym, otherwise I can't remember, so it's HARP. So it's the, what is it, the Hospitality Alliance Responsible Procurement or something. So they are dealing with Scope 3. You've got, it's all moving forwards. Do you think collaboration is key, James?
I think it's very important for people to share what they're doing and what's working and not working. I don't think there's enough of that. I do think the big companies are going to struggle, partly because they don't own their buildings, partly because the big mammoth organisations. I think much like the internet, when that sort of came about, you know, in '97 or so, it wasn't the IBMs and Microsofts of the world that powered ahead. It was the smaller companies that came up with innovative ideas. I think, you know, the companies, the big companies of the future will be the small companies now who power ahead and get that leverage with both the leisure guest and the corporate guest, which we know is only going in one direction. And I think it's about, you know, doing it wholeheartedly rather than just touching the sides or getting your PR company to do it. So I think it's important that everyone shares their information, you know, as much as possible so we can make the biggest impact.
Can I just echo that the new Bob W. report was wonderful, you know, and they started this campaign called, you know, Share Your Numbers.
That was it, yeah.
Yeah, encouraging everyone, you know, in the service department industry to kind of show, you know, how much CO2 you're producing, and they did this really great report.
I was trying to remember who it was earlier, but it was Bob W. Yeah, so they've just launched on, much like Silver and you guys are doing going forward, they've launched the numbers being on per guest per night.
That's right. That's where we need to head to.
Yeah. Is there anything anyone else would like to add? Because I feel like we've got about 30 seconds each. So,
I mean, one thing that gets overlooked is toxicity. Hotel rooms are full of toxins because maids clean the room and half the time they should clean.
James, this is not going to take 30 seconds.
Spray loads of chemicals. Anyway, I was just going to say that, you know, it's something maids suffer from 40% more respiratory diseases than the rest of the population. They suffer from emphysema. It's an overlooked part of the industry.
It's the supply chain that you've got to look into.
Yes.
So the even smaller companies are going to have to look at where their supply chain is.
We're also reducing toxicity and increasing the health of both their clients and their staff.
Yeah,
as
as we say, sustainability is about well-being as well. So that's great. Thank you. I think we're wrapping up, but I want Sarah to have a word.
All I was going to say was, we were talking about partnership a second ago, and I just think one of the things I would really hope that we never do is compete on sustainability. I think we should all just be in the running for the same race, and that's to save the planet. And hopefully we are all on the same track and not sort of throwing stones about who's the most sustainable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And I'd like to add, you know, everybody please change their electricity to 100% renewable energy as of tomorrow. Your homes and your buildings, and you know, that's the most powerful thing you can do today. You know?
And if everyone's doing it in a company, it kind of goes back home, doesn't it? And people start doing it in their lives. So hopefully that's the case. Thank you very much for your time, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.